So speaking of the offense, Trevor, I would say this. You and I have talked a lot about this team, and I've said to friends, buddy of mine, who's been skeptical on the team all year for very good reasons, because a lot of us have been skeptical of this team for a chunk of the season since the Northern Illinois game. But I've said to him, I say, it's 3 games in a row that I've said, if this offense plays like this the rest of the year, insert ... about how good they're going to be. It's not 3 games in a row. And you and I said in our shows in the last bye week that how the team plays for the next 3 weeks on offense is going to tell us, is there room for growth, or is this just kind of who they are? And we've seen them get better, in my opinion, each week to some degree. In some part of the game has gotten better each week. And this team heads into this bye week playing its best football of the year on offense. And so what we're going to do, Trevor, in this segment is we're going to talk about a little bit as to why this offense has gotten better. We'll give you some numbers to kind of back that up, but then also at the end to talk about whether or not there is room for improvement. Now, we'll get into some of the specifics of what they need to do to improve Thursday, but we'll talk about, should we expect them to improve? Is there a possibility for them to improve in the final 4 games, Trevor? But one thing is not up for debate. Over the last since the bye week, Notre Dame has been a far, far more impactful team effective team on the offensive side of the football.
Full transparency, after the Louisville game, I was happy Notre Dame beat a ranked team at home. A couple weeks removed from losing to a MAC team at home, right? So I was very happy against Louisville and how Notre Dame performed in that game for the most part. There was a lull second, third quarter on the offensive side, but never going to be upset about Notre Dame scoring 21 first quarter points against a ranked opponent, right? But full transparency, I was a little nervous going into the bye week, and you and I talked a lot about what will this offense look like. And we're using this first bye week in these next 3 games, being Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy, as a benchmark to say, okay, early in the season, you kind of get away with this is who they are now. There's a lot of room for improvement. It's real hard to say that after game 7, right? So what Notre Dame showed me after this bye week is they are still a very dangerous team. They are a very dangerous team. And they're continuing to get better, which doesn't bode well for the rest of college football, if you ask me personally. And they're far from a finished product still, right? I put out an article earlier today about Riley Leonard and about the improvements that he has made from the first 5 games to the past 3 games. And numbers aside, because we will dive into those here shortly, but numbers aside, he, along with the rest of the offense, just looks more comfortable with what they're doing. Whatever Mike Denbrock and Mike Brown and Gino Guidugli and Dylan McCullough, Joe Rudolph, even what they did over the bye week in this last 3-game stretch, they found something. And they found something with the guys that they have on their roster to really start turning things around, which showed a lot of promise, because I vulnerably as a fan was sitting down thinking about, God, I don't know what more they can do. This might just be them. This might be them. And then they went out and outscored their opponents 131-34 over the last 3 games. So the offense has improved greatly, and they're doing things more efficiently. Sometimes it's easy to look at stats and say, well, Riley Leonard rushed for this much in the first 5 games and only this much in his past 3. Well, it's because 1, he's becoming a better passer, and 2, he's finding a more efficient way to be a part of the offense, which, Bryan, that's one thing that you talk about over and over again, is how can this offense be more efficient? And they're starting to learn different ways of how to do that, which is just so exciting. Which, again, you brought it up in the previous segment about Notre Dame needs to go and continue to find really good ways to win games. And the team, Marcus Freeman, the coordinators, everybody from the top down need to look at this next window of 4 games as fine-tuning yourself and refining the things that you do well, ditching the things you don't do well, and continue the upward trend of remaining a disciplined football team this next 4-game stretch is essentially prep for the postseason. It's not we'll win and then we'll come up for air and see where we're at. There are still things that you need to get better at as a football team, which is an exciting place to be in, considering they've just rattled off 6 straight wins and capping it off with a 37-point victory over an undefeated ranked team. So I'm excited to talk about what the offense has done up to this point and where they can go from here.
Let's put some numbers into that conversation, Trevor. So first 5 games pre-bye. Notre Dame as a team averaged 32.4 points per game. The offense averaged 31 points a game. So I took out special teams and defensive touchdowns. 31 offensive points per game compared to actually I went reversed on this one, but let me fix this here real quick. So first 5 games, Notre Dame was at 32.4 points per game as a team. Last 3 games, they're at 43.7. First 5 games, the offense scored 31 points per game. That included against 2 MAC teams and a really bad Power 5, Power 4 team. 31 points per game. In the last 3 games, against 2 teams that still have a winning record, one of which was ranked and another was ranked for at least a couple weeks earlier in the season. 39 points per game. The first 5 games, the offense averaged 385.6 yards per game and 6.2 yards per play. The last 3 games against, again, I would argue, overall better competition. No one as good as Texas A&M or Louisville, but no one as bad as Miami of Ohio, Northern Illinois, or Purdue. Stanford's close, but I think they're better than Purdue. Last 3 games, 442.7 yards per game, 6.6 yards per play. And what you have seen is as teams start getting into the conference play, their statistics are going down because they're playing tougher competition. Whereas Notre Dame's statistics keep going up and they keep climbing in the rankings. Now, they're still a long way away from where they need to be. Right now, they're 54th in total offense at 407 yards a game. Right now, they are, let's see here where they're at. Yards per play, they're at 38th and 6.35. But if you look at where they ranked in the last 3 games, and again, this is not oh my gosh, this is such a dominant, 2015 or, 05 offense, but they don't need to be that when you look at what they have on defense. But the fact is that Notre Dame offensively is playing a lot better football. Not where they, to me, like where they necessarily were to start the season, where we thought they'd be before the season started, because I think the Georgia Tech game, I would have liked to see one more offensive touchdown. But you've scored over 40 points in 2 of your last 3 games, where in the first 5 games, you only scored more than 31 once, and that came against Purdue. So, that's kind of where I look at it, Trevor, and say, as a team, you scored over 30 points in each of the last 4 games. In the first 4 games, you scored over 30 points once. So they're certainly, Trevor, no question about it, they're hitting their stride on offense. And I think a big part of it are some of the changes that we saw during the bye. This isn't just a byproduct of a team that got rest. This is a byproduct of what you and I talked about. They're going to be able to look at themselves and say, okay, what are we good at? What are we not good at? How do we want this team to be? And getting Leonard going was obviously important. Figuring out how to get the offensive line to play better was important. And at the end of the day, this is where having a coordinator like Mike Denbrock proves incredibly beneficial. You give him that time with the rest of the staff and say, hey, listen, we got to figure some things out. We're not going to just settle for what we are because we have a great defense. We're just going to do enough to win. We've got to get better. And how Notre Dame has looked the last 3 games is very different from a effectiveness standpoint. But Trevor, it's looked a lot different from a structural standpoint as well. And that's played into it as well. What they're doing pass game wise has changed a lot the last 3 weeks. What they're doing with Leonard has changed a lot the last 3 weeks. They have not been nearly as reliant as your numbers show in the article on him as a runner. They're not doing as much. They're doing some different things scheme-wise in the pass game. And so they've said, hey, listen, here's what Riley's good at. Here's what the offensive line is good at. Let's build around that. And that big picture has played a big role in them really coming out of the bye week playing really, really good football.
A lot of the adjustments that we had talked about them needing to make and us wanting to see them make, for me on offense, they checked a lot of those boxes. Argument could be made, all of them, right? The last bye week, and we'll kind of start from the top down here. There was a lot of talk about Marcus Freeman and about, will he let Mike Denbrock be Mike Denbrock? And will he let his offense truly go out and be as dynamic as we think? Is it as open as we would all like it to be? I think we're getting there, to be honest with you. But what I've seen from Marcus Freeman, I mean, Georgia Tech game is a prime example. You run a fake field goal and a fake punt, winning by double digits, putting your offense in a position to score again. That's something that I don't know if we see from Marcus Freeman the first couple weeks. It isn't. Mike Denbrock, we were talking about, hey, man, you got to find ways to get your playmakers the football. So what have they done? Past 2 games each, they've hit 9 different receivers in the passing game. They're getting Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price on the field at the same time. You're seeing Aeneas Williams ramp up his touches in crucial moments. Not, all right, well, Notre Dame's up by 24. Let's get the young guys in. Aeneas Williams had a great red zone catch in the first quarter, catch and run. They're putting the guys on the field that can make the most amount of impact. They're getting guys involved. Bryan, you talked a lot about how Notre Dame is using Riley Leonard in the run game, albeit the stats look sexy. It's not sustainable. He can't carry the ball 12, 13 times a game in that fashion, that way.
Trev, we flat out said that, dude.
Yeah.
This is not sustainable. He cannot take this much pounding for an entire season. Now, here's the thing, though. What's important about this, I want to bring this up before you move on because you're making some great points here. You may need him in this final 4 games to be more of an impact in the running game.
Yeah.
But by limiting what he's taken now over the course of 5 weeks, because 2 buys and 3 games where he's not played in the fourth quarter of 2 of those games, and he's taken very little hits in the second half of most of those games, didn't run a ton against Georgia Tech. He's going to go into this Final Four stretch more prepared to be a little bit more of a focal point in a couple of those games if need be than he would have been if you would have kept riding them the way that they were the first stretch of the season. Because like when you may look at it and say, what are you guys talking about? Like not using him as much. Like the dude's had 10 carries in at least in the last 2 games. He has. A lot of those he had 2 designed runs on Saturday. 2. The other 8 were scrambles. You know what the difference is as a quarterback, and when you also, I can tell you this from my experience, but also studying Riley Leonard, when you're running on scrambles, you're not getting the same kind of hits when you're running quarterback power or quarterback counter where you're getting 3-4 guys. You may get knocked on the ground on the sideline, and that's never fun, but those are different hits. How many times have we seen Riley Leonard on Saturday? I'm thinking just off the top of my head, 4 or 5 of those plays where he scrambled, where the play finished with him ducking out of bounds. You know what I mean? So it's a different animal, dude. It's a completely different animal when you're getting those runs because of your playmaking ability as a scrambler than when you are designed. Now, he's still going to have some design runs. You have the goal line quarterback sneak, which, again, isn't a super physical play, where people are running starts at you. You think of the touchdown run he had against Georgia Tech last week. He went in untouched. Those things are a big part of it. They're a big part of it, Trevor. So, yeah, the overall numbers may not look like he's taking less of an impact, but way more of those are scrambles, where in the first part of the season, a lot of those were designed runs. So that to me is a big part of that because you're still getting an impact from Riley Leonard's legs. That's what I love about what they're doing. They have freed him to play more street ball in the passing game, which I think is huge. So, because what you don't want to do is take away Riley Leonard's ability to make impact with his legs. You don't want to do that because he's really dynamic as a runner. They've just shifted it away from the designed runs where he's going to take more of a pounding, and now it's more street ball. And one of his 2 designed carries on Saturday were a quarterback sneak from the 1-yard line and a quarterback draw. where they spread the field, they went out and he takes a set and then runs. So it's been very interesting to see how they've changed that. Where like, how do we still use his legs without making him the focal point of our run game? And can the run game thrive without Riley Leonard being the dominant part of it like he was early? And the answer is they have. They absolutely have so far in the stretch.
Well, and Mike Denbrock has done a really good job of getting to know his quarterback, because there were things where Riley Leonard missed in the spring. Some of those kinks would have been worked out on Mike Denbrock's end. A lot of us, it was obvious that the belief was Riley Leonard gets in a rhythm when he uses his legs, which he does. I still believe that to be true, but how they've done that is now completely different. Completely different. Because before it was, all right, Riley, we're going to run power read and quarterback draw and quarterback counter. That's going to allow you to open up and push the ball down the field. And it worked kind of, but some of the issue is your quarterback's taking a lot of shots from some hard-hitting linebackers, and then you're asking him to push the ball 25, 30 yards down the field. Now what the offense has evolved to is we're going to go out and kind of just let you be a point guard. You know, kind of using this other sport analogy of, hey, sometimes we're going to ask you to kick it out to your playmakers. Other times we're asking you to take it to the cup. And Mike Denbrock has done a really good job of crafting the offense in that way. And that was one of the biggest things that I was looking for coming out of the bye week of, yes, has Notre Dame shown that they can win games by rushing Riley Leonard 13 times? Yeah, because he's a dynamic runner. He's a great athlete. Not sustainable. Not sustainable whatsoever. And you were going up against 3 run defenses that are pretty solid in Louisville or in Stanford, in Georgia Tech, in a scrappy Navy team that is always a physical game whenever Notre Dame plays them. And they did a really good job of crafting it. So from top to bottom, the offense corrected a lot of things in the bye week that needed fixing. And now what I talked about in the article and what you and I are going to continue to talk about today is now it's time to fine tune those things. Because if I know Mike Denbrock, and if you know Mike Denbrock, he's not a guy that's sitting back in his office right now saying, I did it, guys.
We figured it out.
Here's our offense. So what we're going to see.
He's definitely not going to be doing that. That's for sure.
No. And honestly, knowing Mike Denbrock, he's probably erring on the side of he's kind of upset about how the offense is still performing, because that's just the mindset that he's in. Like,
I don't
not
know
upset
that
with.
Yeah. I don't know that, like, from what I know of Coach Denbrock, it's more so he's never satisfied. And I don't mean that as in he never praises the players. He doesn't tell them good job. He doesn't look at a performance and say, hey, we did a pretty good job on it. But it's always like, yeah, we did that, but he's going to be thinking about, man, but that one drive where we had to punt, and that one drive where if they don't muff the punt, like that's a different ball game. You know, he looks at things like that, and you want that. You don't want a coach that just say, hey, we average X number of points a game. You want a coach to say, yeah, we did that, but we should have averaged this many points a game. And if we would have done this, this, and this, we would do that. Because Mike Denbrock also, remember, came from the SEC. He played in the SEC title game 2 years ago. He knows if we play like that against Georgia, we're getting beat. If we play like that against Bama, we're getting beat. Yeah, it was good enough to beat Miami of Ohio. And yeah, it was good enough to beat Stanford. And yeah, it was good enough to beat Georgia Tech, but it's not good enough to beat Georgia. That's how he looks at it. It's not like, hey, we scored, X number of points and had right. And that's what you want from a coordinator. He's never satisfied. He knows, if you think about his last 4 years as a coach, 2 of them were in the SEC. They played Bama twice, played Georgia in the SEC title game, played Tennessee. His last 2 years at Cincinnati, they played Bama to end the season and Notre Dame in 2021, and then lost to Bama in the playoff. The year before that, his team finished the season playing Georgia in the Peach Bowl. Mm-hmm. So he's gone against those teams. He knows what it takes to beat those teams. He's won some of those games, but he's also lost several of them, and he knows, I've seen the performances where we were good enough to beat the AAC opponents, or we were good enough to beat some of the SEC East and lower SEC West opponents, but they weren't good enough to beat Bama enough and Georgia enough. Now they lost to Georgia by a couple points in 2020. And that was Marcus Freeman's last game at Cincinnati, by the way. They lost 24-22, I think. Offense couldn't do enough in the second half to win that game. Against Bama the next year, the defense actually held Bama to 24 points. Offense wasn't good enough. So he understands, like, listen, this is where we got to get to. And he's always building towards. So I think that not happy is not necessarily the word that I would use. It's more of he's not satisfied.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good place to be, because you can say, because if you're not happy, then you, like, I knew a coach in Notre Dame there was a lot of times was not happy. It's just kind of his personality. I loved that dude. But it's like kind of like, because he wasn't happy, he would sometimes struggle to say, well, hey, we're actually pretty good at this. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah.
And that's the thing from Coach Denbrock that I believe he'll do is, like, he's like, look, when we find something we're good at, let's ride that sucker. Let's be happy about that. But then how do we complement it? And I think we've seen that. And then we're going to see that continue to develop and evolve over the next 4 games, because in a lot of ways, this team is still evolving offensively. And, I think those are really different. And somebody just asked a question, like Garrett Medford asked us. He was just curious what your opinion has been on in my opinion, very subtle, impressive usage of pistol versus shotgun in the run game. And Garrett, like, that's kind of what we're talking about. Like if you look at, so when I track games, Trevor, I track backfield alignment. It's one of the things I do. And against, they used it a little bit against Northern Illinois and Texas A&M. They didn't use it at all against Purdue. Miami of Ohio, Louisville, they used it once. Against Stanford, they used it 7 times. Against Georgia Tech, they used it 11 times. And I'm not done tracking the game against Purdue, but from where I am with the backfield alignments, they had it 3 times in the first 3 drives. Well, what's the reason for that? It's because it's a minor adjustment that they're doing with their inside zone and their duo runs, because they ran a ton of duo this past week where they were very little duo in previous games. It's a way to where we can make things look more similar, because backfield action is going to look a lot different. I mean, you're going to be able to tell. One of the things you can do to tell if the difference between inside zone and duo is in an offset look, it's the footwork by the back. It's going to be different. Well, at a pistol, it looks very similar. It times things up differently as well. It changes the timing. It sells play action a little bit more effectively when you use it off play action. It just gives defenses something different to think about and utilize. And they're not using it a ton, as he said, subtle. But when you look at it, it's just giving the defense a little bit more to think about, but it's allowing his backs to kind of attack downhill a little bit differently. And I think what it's done, Trevor, is it's helped them be more effective in some of those short yardage situations where they can get downhill a little bit more effectively and just kind of hit attack the aiming points a little bit differently with a little bit more speed and power, because he doesn't have huge backs. So I give them a couple more steps to get going downhill. Maybe that helps them get going. So I think Garrett's observation is very astute. He has noticed that. And that's what we're talking about. Like they use it a little bit at times during the season, but it has certainly grown quite a bit in these last 3 games. That's part of that. Let's make some adjustments and let's work on getting better. And it speaks to that. And it speaks to right there from a coaching staff standpoint. I don't know if that was Mike Denbrock's idea. For all we know, that could have been Joe Rudolph's idea, or even more likely, if it wasn't Mike Denbrock's idea, maybe it was Deland McCullough's idea. Or maybe it was all of them talking through it, and that's what they decided as a staff. But the point is, they didn't just say, hey, let's just coach a little bit better and expect a little bit more from our players. Hey, what we're doing works, fellas, but we just need you guys to do a better job of it. No, they said, hey, guys, what we're doing is not good enough. We've got to make some changes. And they did. They could have just benched all the players and said, hey, you guys suck and you're not doing your job. They haven't done that. It's like, okay, how do we get more out of Chris Mitchell? How do we get more out of Bo Collins? How do we get more out of Jaden Greathouse? How do we get more out of our running backs? How do we put Riley Leonard in better situations? And I think these are little things that they're doing that play a role into that, in my opinion. I think some of that stuff, too, is it's also you're not seeing as much of the reading by Riley Leonard in the run game. And so what you've seen also is more of designed runs with no read. and the pistol has helped with getting those a little bit more downhill. So because you don't have to worry as much. You can still read out a pistol, but they just don't. And it creates a little bit of a different action for the quarterback when you're reading out a pistol than in like offset shotgun. So I think that factors into it as well. And it speaks to what you were referring to, Trev, which they're just not using him as much on designed runs, which I think has benefited him and benefited the offense. And they can always ramp it back up when they need it. That's the thing.
Yeah, they can ramp it back up because they know that it works. But they've been in situations offensively where they don't have to. Right? It's really exciting. You brought up how running it out of the pistol also helps with play action, which I couldn't agree more with. Because you're now opposing defenses are watching Riley Leonard's back turn to the line of scrimmage, which then will help sell the run more. I mean, it's little things like that might not seem like it goes a long way, but it does. I think Notre Dame as a whole, their coaching staff is working better together as a cohesive unit, which is really cool. I mean, we just listed off all the offensive coaches that might have had this idea to start running a little bit more out of pistol. For all we know, Al Golden could have put in some input there. One thing that Mike Denbrock has at his disposal is the best defensive coordinator in college football to ask, hey, what are some things?
Best.
Yeah.
Two of the best. Because let's not forget, before he became the head coach, Marcus Freeman was considered one of the best defensive minds in the game.
Very true.
So, yeah.
Very true.
So, Trev, obviously part of the growth has been we've seen better play from the offensive line. It has been world-beating offensive line play. We're not like, now that's a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line right there. It hasn't been that. Even against Navy, it wasn't that. But what we're starting to see in the past game, the last 3 games, is less of the mental, technical mistakes that just were rampant. I mean, we were so pissed after the Louisville game because we're just watching Riley Leonard getting drilled on quick game. And just like, what the heck is going on? And it got better against Stanford. It got better against Georgia Tech. And it got even better against Navy, who actually, ironically, is the best pass rushing team of those 3, statistically. So that's been the biggest adjustment improvement for me. And I don't want this to sound like I'm banging on Sam Pendleton because I love Sam Pendleton. I think he's got a very bright future at Notre Dame. But you get young guys sometimes, they just get to a point where they're just mentally, and some of the best players I've ever coached went through this as young players, where it's just like, I'm in a rut and I don't know how to get myself out. And I think that's kind of where Sam was. And Sam's way of trying to fix things is just to try to beat somebody up. And so he'd overextend himself. You know, I think of the one run against, I think it was Stanford, where he hits a guy and just kind of throws him instead of driving him. And by throwing him, he allowed that guy to then squeeze on the ball carrier. Where if he drives the guy, cuts off of it. That to me is Sam trying to, I got to do something to earn my keep, so to speak. And so I think getting him out of the lineup helped the offensive line settle in more as pass blockers. Now, I think you're going to lose a little bit of power because Sam, when he's right, is still your most powerful blocker. I mean, if you'd have gone through the first 5 games of the year, Sam Pendleton probably grades out the lowest of all your offensive linemen. Would you agree that's most likely the scenario? However, if you put a highlight tape together of the Notre Dame offensive line and their best plays, you see a lot of Sam Pendleton in that highlight tape. That's kind of where he was, right? And so now with Billy Shrouth and Rocco Spindler at guard, Billy has the ability to move people. I don't know how, where his strength is right now after missing over a month of the season. And Rocco can move people, but I don't know that any of them move them quite as well as Sam did. But what they do, however, is there's more steadiness to the line. And I think that really helped against Navy. So the line has improved the last 3 games. Are they where they need to be? Absolutely not. Go listen to, our Upon Further review and your guys' post-game show after Georgia Tech. There's a lot of people pissed off about the play of the offensive line. Rightfully so. But you compare it to where it was in the games leading up to the bye week, and it's still better. Your worst performance of this 3-game stretch was against Georgia Tech, and that was still better than what you saw against Louisville It's better than what you saw against Miami of Ohio. It's certainly better than what you saw against Northern Illinois. So that steady growth. Now the question is, Trevor, and we'll talk about this more on Thursday as well, but I want to address it here now, is the question now is how much better can it get? Have they plateaued and just like, okay, you're just going to be a solid, steady group? Or is there I don't think they're going to like look like a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line in the final 4 games. I don't think they have the talent in the lineup or the experience in the lineup, right? To be that. You're still starting two redshirt sophomores and a true freshman in your starting lineup. However, my question is, can they take one more jump and above where they are now? That's going to be a question that we'll have to address in the final 4 games. We don't know the answer to that. But I'm sorry, anyone trying to argue that, I'm not even gonna let him distract me in the show again. I'm not even gonna go there. But that's the question in the final 4 games, Trevor. Is there another jump for this line now that you have? I got to say again, and this is not a knock on Sam, because I think Sam's got a very bright future, and I loved him coming in Notre Dame. But getting older and getting your best lineman back, because once Jagasol went down, there was no question who your best lineman was. It's Billy Schrouth. Getting him back and then moving him to left guard with Rocco at right guard was such a smart move. They should have done it much earlier, but it is what it is. I was just thinking they were just going to plug him right back in at right guard and either move Rocco to left guard and make him switch or leave Sam at left guard. I think getting Billy at left guard was such a savvy move, and that's what gives him coming back, and then coming back at left guard is what gives me the hope that this line does have another jump left in it.
Yeah, we've talked about it throughout the season so far of Notre Dame's offensive line, especially with the remaining opponents they have on their schedule. They just have to be okay. They don't have to go out and be Joe Moore Award finalists. They just have to be here, right? Now, just as much as we are using this next 4-game stretch as a benchmarking tool, so is the Notre Dame coaching staff. Because right now, Notre Dame is in position to make the playoffs and potentially, depending on the draw, make a relatively deep run into the playoffs. But in order to do that, you have to have your offensive line playing at a level that's higher than what it's at right now. So what can you do over this next 4 weeks? And what can you do over the next, X amount of games out of the bye to take that next step, which is something that we're going to dive into throughout the week here. But I agree. It's no mystery to me that Billy Schrouth comes back, and then as a unit in both phases of the game, passing and running, you have one of the best games that you've had all season, arguably the best. So it's going to be interesting to see what steps they take over the next 4 games.
We talk a lot about the offensive line getting better has been important. The receivers have gotten better. That's the group that still has a lot left to get to, in my opinion. However, when you look at the growth, it really comes down to Riley Leonard, and for a host of reasons, not just all on him, but Riley Leonard playing a lot better is a big part of that. And I'm going to pull up the numbers from your article today, Trevor. And here's the numbers. In the first 5 games, Riley Leonard completed 65.1% of his passes. He's the last 3 games at 68.1. That's not a huge jump. But here's what's been the difference. Yards per attempt, first 5 games, 6.0. It's abysmal. Yards per completion, 9.1. Terrible. 150 yards per game, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks, a passer rating of 119.76. And he averaged 6.3 yards per carry with 7 rushing touchdowns in 5 games. In the last 3 games, so Riley Leonard in the first 5 games had 10 total touchdowns. In the last 3 games, he's completing 68.1% of his throws, 203.3 yards per game, which is impressive when you consider he hasn't played in the fourth quarter of 2 of those 3 games. And in the last game, he had 1 drive in the third quarter. He's averaging 8.5 yards per attempt. That's not world-beating numbers, but that's much improved and good. It's at least good. And 12.4 yards per completion. He's got 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, a 159.36 passer rating, and he is still averaging 6.3 yards per carry, even though it's getting done in a lot of different ways. And that type of efficiency in the pass game, when your completion percentage only went up 3 points, is due because you're not only still completing passes at a higher rate, you are more effective throwing the ball down the field. Almost all their biggest passing plays of the year have come in the last 3 games.
Yeah.
You think of the bomb to Bo Collins, you think of the multiple deep balls this past week. Didn't throw the ball down the field very well against Georgia Tech because you couldn't protect the quarterback. But like, to me, Trevor, that is a big – now, the offensive line plays a role in that. The receivers play a role in that. The running backs play a role in that. You go look at the pass pro from Jadarian Price on the touchdown pass to Chris Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, this is what I call team football. Team football. So you see that kind of jump, Trevor, and you say, man, that's really impressive production. And as I said, 10 touchdowns in the first 5 games, 9 touchdowns in the last 3 games. And he's playing less football. Because he played, I believe, almost all but every game except for Purdue. Came out at halftime of Purdue. I think he played all but 1 series against Miami of Ohio. Played all of Texas A&M. Played all of Northern Illinois. Played all of Louisville. Right? So that is like that jump coincides with, because you're not seeing a huge jump in production from Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. In fact, their yards per attempt has gone down a little bit because they've played better rushing defenses. That's not a byproduct of them. That's better teams, and your offensive line hasn't played great in the run game. That jump in from Riley Leonard is a huge impact on why this offense is now scoring basically 40 points per game since the last bye week.
What did you say at the start of the season, Bryan? That this team will go as far as how far Riley Leonard will take them. And it is no coincidence that in the most balanced we have seen this Notre Dame team over the last 3 games, Riley Leonard was kind of at the center of that. And he's a kid that underwent a lot of scrutiny. And some games, rightfully so. I'm not here to say that Riley Leonard has played a perfect 8-game stretch here. That's not what I'm saying. His improvement over the last 3 games is something that definitely needs to go on notice, because he is. I talked at the beginning of this segment about how the team made the necessary changes that they needed to coming out of the first bye. At the center of that conversation is Riley Leonard. It is. It would have been very easy for this kid to kind of crumble and under that kind of pressure and that level of expectation. And I think everybody who talks about Riley Leonard's poor play, the one person who would be the first to talk about it would be Riley Leonard. And he knew he wasn't playing up to the standard. So what he's done over the last 3 games, compounded with Gino Guidugli and Mike Denbrock and the rest of the offensive coaching staff, is learn a more efficient way to be a part of this offense, which has been so exciting to see, which is why I just always go back to fine-tuning and refining what you've done up to this point to now not just be an efficient part of this offense, but to be a dominating part of this offense. It's kind of transformed the first 5 games. Like, yeah, they have a guy that can hurt us with his legs. Okay. To, hey, Notre Dame has a dual threat kid that can hurt us in multiple ways. And he has the opportunity over the next 4 games to kind of put defenses in a spot where they're like, we don't know how to game plan for this kid. We don't know how to stop this offense. And he holds the focal point to it. You brought up such a good point. Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love have been who they have been the entire season. And I say that in a good way. So do you. So does the rest of Irish Nation and IB Nation. And the next key to unlocking the success for this offense was getting Riley Leonard to play at a level where he was at Duke. And that's why everybody was so excited that Notre Dame got a dynamic quarterback like that. So these next 4 games, again, I've said it ad nauseum today, but it's going to be a benchmarking tool to see what next steps Riley Leonard takes in preparation to getting to the postseason.
Greg McElroy made a comment that he said Riley Leonard didn't play that well against Texas A&M. And I thought that statement summarized so much of why people still don't appreciate how he plays. And because I think if you look at, so did he throw well against them? No, he definitely didn't throw well versus them. There's no question about that. He didn't throw well against Texas A&M until the last drive, right? But he's a big reason why they won that game because of what he did as a runner. And I think that's what a lot of people miss is outside of the Northern Illinois game, he was still a driving force behind the success of the offense. People obsessed over the passing, partly for good reason because you had to be better. But what you're seeing now is the passing is coming along. And now you're really seeing what he's capable of. And there was a legitimate question of, would we ever see the 2022 version of Riley Leonard again? That's a very fair question. And I don't know if we've got that completely back. I mean, he had a couple 300-yard games in 2022. But he's so much closer to that now. And that's what I loved about the Navy game, Trevor, is because – and really that game more than any other, and I'm hoping it's a sign of things to come, it showed me that Mike Denbrock has finally figured out how I can put Riley in structure but still let him play street ball. You know what I mean? And that's really where I look at and say, if they can build on that, then they've got a chance to be really, really good. Really, really good.
It's interesting. When you go back and you look at the Stanford game, then the Georgia Tech game, and then the Navy game, you kind of see almost perfectly the progression of Riley Leonard through those three games, right? You have the Stanford game where it's like, hey, this pass defense is not good. Got to open it up. So what did he do? He passed for the most passing yards that he had in the season, albeit it's 229 passing yards. And I don't want to make it sound like he lit them up for 375 yards through the air, but Riley Leonard also didn't finish that game. It's one thing to keep in mind. Against Georgia Tech, he did not have a good start. Started the game 2 of 4 for 8 yards and an interception, a bad interception. So then we got to see how Riley Leonard was going to respond to adversity and how he responded to not getting off to a fast start. And he proceeded to go 12 of 12 for 187 yards and lead 3 consecutive scoring drives. Then against Navy, it was like, hey, let's put it all together, right? We've seen you put together spurts of consistency, like what he did against Georgia Tech. And we've seen you air it out and get big gains over the air against Stanford. Let's see if we can put that together in a complete performance against Navy. And all things considered, he did. And he played 1 drive in the third quarter and didn't touch the field in the fourth. Gives you a lot of promise for what this kid has left in the tank moving forward. And I'm excited to see it. I'm ready to see what the next step of progression is for him. Because in 2022 at Duke, yeah, he had a couple of 300 passing yard games, and he has been on pace for that a couple of times this year against lesser opponents.
Game was that way for sure.
Yeah,
I think he was on pace. I think it was like 302. If he would have stayed on that same pace, and then even this past weekend, he threw for 441 yards in the first half, and had 1 series in the second half. So that's a good point, Trevor. Is you have to look at that and say, like, you know, Purdue, he was not. He had 100 yards passing at halftime, or 112 at halftime. So he's on pace for 224. But the Stanford game, he was on pace for 300. And then if you just look at what they did in the first half, and this is why I kind of get pissed when people are like, well, Navy kind of gave him that game. Yeah, Navy is the reason Notre Dame had 302 yards of offense at halftime of that game. Navy is why Riley Leonard had 141 yards passing at halftime of that game, where I think his longest completion was only 42 yards. It wasn't like he had like an 80-yard touchdown pass that like padded the stats. And they had a 20-something yard gain called back because of a penalty. So, you know, yes, you were correct. And they didn't blow as many people out at Duke. That's also a very fair point, Trevor. I mean, they had 2 blowout wins early against A&T and Temple. But then they won by 21, 24, pulled away late, 7, 17, 3, and 17. Whereas now they're winning by 42, 37, 59. And so, yeah, it's a good point. That's a good point. As far as, yeah, that maybe he would be on pace if they were playing games as competitively as they were against Duke, where they needed him to throw for 4 quarters. It's a good point, Trevor. He might have that in the last. I mean, because again, the 2 games I pointed to are 2 of the last 3 games.
Sure.
Where he was on pace, if he'd have played 4 quarters, to be at least 280, which if Riley Leonard's throwing for 280, 180 yards a game, this team's probably not, unless they're just getting killed early. If it's a competitive game and he's throwing for 280, or I should say, if they're not losing and he's throwing for 280, it means they're lighting somebody up, and this team gets real scary.
Yeah, 100%. And I say all that to say, for Notre Dame fans who still might not see it, or for people who are just adamant on the Riley Leonard ain't it train, he is so much closer than what people think. Look at things with context. Just watch how he performs in games. This is a kid who is significantly more comfortable within his offense, playing with so much more confidence. This team, I mean, even the little things, celebrating first down, celebrating touchdowns. This is a polar opposite team than what we saw earlier in the season. And all that just starts to gel. So Riley Leonard is poised, I believe, to have a really good final 4-game stretch. And I firmly believe he's going to be a player that people talk about going into the playoffs. He had a slow start to the season, but Notre Dame has Riley Leonard. You can't count them out. They have a dynamic player quarterback. And that's something that's going to be talked about come playoff time. I fully believe it.
So that's the other question is there another jump for him? And my answer is yes, if there's another jump for the line.
Yep. Yeah.
If the line is capable of playing, and again, when we're talking about the offensive line, the expectation is not, okay, look like the 2020 O-line, look like the 2017 O-line, look like the 15 O-line, the 12. That's unfair. When you are down 2 of your guys that were preseason starters, I don't care what you think of the coach, and my feelings on the coach are well known, but when you've lost 2 starters, one of which you had to replace with a true freshman, right? Because I'm very critical of Joe Rudolph, and I'm being critical of him in the chat. People are trying to make excuses for his performance, and I don't buy him to a degree. But there's a fine line between that and saying, I don't care if you lost 2 starters, including an elite 5-star, 6-7 through to burn. This is Notre Dame. You should still have an elite offensive line. That's nonsense. That's saying, well, you didn't like the hire to begin with, and you're just looking for reasons to bang on them. That's what that would be. My thing is, the issues that I've had are whether you're talking about the freshmen or how the line has not played fundamentally as sound as it should. They did not show improvement in the first 5 games at all when it came to handling certain parts of the game at all. Well, that's a poor coaching. It's poor coaching. But they just played a team that's as good as any team they've played in playing those same exact games that they struggle with all the first 5 games. And for the most part, Trevor, they handled it really well. That's also coaching, right? I mean, you have to give credit. But so the question now is, whatever you think of what he's done over the course of the entire season, where I have some issues, the question is now they are hopefully going to peak here, because there's this dichotomy of the last 2 games. I thought they were good. They struggled in the first and fourth quarters against Georgia Tech. They looked pretty darn good in the second and third quarters against Georgia Tech. Well, against Navy, I thought they kind of played well the whole game. Is that a sign of things to come? Now that you've got a little bit more experience in the lineup, taking Billy out, which is ironic because Sam Pendleton has as many career starts right now as Billy Schrauth does. Think about that, because Billy started 3 games last year. He started the first 3 games this year. And then this game against them was the 7th game. And but it's different. Sam had 1 year in the system in college before that, where Billy got his first start basically like it'd be like Sam getting his first start against Virginia. That's when Billy was finally thrust into that moment. So Billy had 2 full seasons to kind of learn from veteran players, where Sam was thrown into a really tough spot right away. But Billy's older, and he's got more time in college than what Sam had. But the point is, if you can build on this Navy win, and which I thought was a very good coaching job by the offensive line coach, not only just to put Billy Shrout at left guard, but just to handle all the different games that they played in, it is like, okay, if you can build on that, then that's going to mean Riley Leonard's going to be better. It's going to mean that the offense is going to be a lot better. And I'm going to have an article coming out later, Trevor, where I'm going to say this. The offensive line is actually the key to how this team finishes. If this offense takes another step, it doesn't happen just because Riley Leonard's more comfortable in the offense, because if he doesn't have time to throw, it doesn't matter how much more comfortable he's in the offense, right? And so that's the thing you look at and say, okay, now that you've got Billy back, and now you've only got 2 new starters and not 3 because of injury, that should raise the bar a little bit. And the guy you got back is your most talented guy of the guys that started the season. So you hope that that's going to be the key, because if that right there, Trevor, is going to tell us whether this offense is still good in the last stretch, which they've been good the last 3 games. They were average the first 5 outside of 1 game and 1 quarter. Do you agree with that? Let me rephrase that. 1 game and 2 quarters. I thought they were lights out against Purdue. I thought the offense played great in the 4th quarter against Texas A&M and great in the 1st quarter against Louisville. And that's about it. After that, they just out-talented Miami of Ohio. They didn't play that. They scored 28 freaking points against Miami of Ohio. You know what I mean? Like, they scored 14 because they were terrible in those 2 games. They just kind of went into a shell in quarters 2 and 3 against Louisville, right? But now we've seen them play really well in 2 of the last 3 games. You just got your best lineman back, and you're coming off what may be your best performance of the season offensively, offensive line-wise. Can you build on that? That's going to be what tells us if they're going to be really good on offense. Because if this team got, like, really good on offense, and I just mean, like, you can go score 27 to 30 on everybody, like, now that's like, okay, now this team is really scary because of how good we think the defense is going to be, assuming that the defense can keep rolling. And that's going to be the topic of our final show, Trevor. But before we get there, folks, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, love a 5-star review, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Do all that stuff, folks. You know what to do. Help us out. Get her done.